Hi everyone, welcome back to another Authenticity life coaching video blog. In today's video blog, I'm going to be sharing with you how to break the cycle of generational trauma so that you don't pass it on to your children. I think this is something that for me on a personal level has been a really important thing for me to look at within myself. And it's been a big part of my own journey to reclaiming my authentic self and finding who I am. And it's such a powerful journey for me to go back and look at how my childhood experiences impacted the way that I think, the way that I feel, my belief systems, my subconscious programming, my emotions, and my ability to be vulnerable and express my emotions, in particular in my relationship with my wife and my relationship to my children. And this is where oftentimes as parents, you will start noticing certain aspects or elements of your childhood being brought up through your kids. Because as parents, anything that we have from our childhood that is unloved or unresolved as far as trauma goes, we are going to unconsciously project that onto our children and our relationships, because it represents things inside of us subconsciously that maybe at a level of when we were children, when we didn't really know how to navigate that pain, we developed coping mechanisms. We developed all of these patterns to be able to deal with the emotional pain that we were feeling, and maybe to survive experiences that were very hard to survive on an emotional level or a mental or a physical level, on many different levels. And these coping mechanisms and these patterns and habits create the experiences create beliefs, and they create patterns and habits that we develop, belief systems that we develop, that we carry with us into our adult life. And as parents, that we then unconsciously project onto our children. And they end up becoming this intergenerational transmitter of the next generation of trauma. So we're passing it on to them, and they pass it on to the next generation. And so I've always been very interested in asking the question, how do we break that cycle? And a lot of the learning that I've done on my own journey, and a lot of the powerful insights and the greatest healings I've ever had, have been all in relationship to my own journey back to my childhood and the significant experiences and traumatic experiences in my childhood that shaped my relationship to myself, my beliefs about myself, who I am as a person. Because in order to be authentic in life, we have to start unraveling a lot of these conditioned patterns and habits that we have, that have been subconsciously hardwired into us from a very young age as children, energetically through our parents or primary caregivers. And a lot of times this happens subconsciously, so it's not a conscious thing, it's an unconscious thing. And you have to remember that when we're children, from when we're born to the age 7, we're very much in theta brainwaves, theta and alpha, very highly subconsciously programmable, which means our nervous system, our body is wide open for programming. And our emotions as well. So a lot of that stuff slips right by the conscious mind and goes directly into our subconscious mind and becomes the default program. And so in this video, I'm going to take you through some of the steps that you can follow to start becoming more conscious and more aware of what childhood conditioning you have and how you're projecting your potential childhood trauma, your experiences, how you're projecting that trauma, that generational trauma onto your children, and how you can stop that and break that cycle. So I'm going to take you through a number of steps that are going to allow you to not only become conscious of it, but also allow you to start this healing journey and to break the cycle so that you can really truly honor your children for the unique and magnificent and beautiful children that they are, without feeling the need to have to shape them into something that isn't even really true for you or for them. So turn this over. So the first thing I want to talk about is how your experiences as a child affect your ability to be a parent. And this is such, I guess, one of the key things we have to start looking at, because as a parent myself, I know how hard this is to navigate being a parent and to navigate the vulnerability of, different experiences that you see your children go through, and how those experiences and their behavior and the way they respond to them affect and trigger certain unconscious or subconscious programs in you, and certain emotions and things that you maybe had repressed that you didn't even know was there from your childhood. So raising children is very difficult in that sense, because it brings up a lot of your stuff. So it can be very difficult to navigate if you don't have the tools, the resources, or the resilience to navigate the internal world of your own trauma and the things that you still carry with you from your childhood and the things that happened to you as a child. And so we have to, understand, first of all, what trauma is. And we have to understand how we unconsciously project our sense of, our beliefs, our sense of what's right and wrong, and morals and ethics, how we project our emotions, our beliefs about ourselves, all of these things unconsciously onto our children. And we have to understand, where this comes from, because whether you like it or not, everyone does it. Nobody can escape it. So the question is, how do we start breaking this cycle? And we break it by becoming conscious of these projections and developing a greater degree, a greater level of self-awareness. So that self-awareness is really powerful. When you realize that a lot of the things that you're projecting onto your children are more about you and your trauma than they are about the kids, then you start to take a step back. You start to work on yourself more instead of blaming them and shaming them and judging them and projecting onto them. You take responsibility for what is yours and for dealing with your emotional trauma that you're still hanging on to. And that simple act of taking responsibility for what's yours and for owning that and being vulnerable, and maybe even sharing that with your kids when it's necessary, to help them understand that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to navigate these uncomfortable emotions. Just the demonstration of that and leading by example will have a massive impact on your children's ability to navigate their own emotions, to feel safe, to express themselves vulnerably, and to honor who they truly are. I can already see that so much in my children, and it's such a gift. But again, if we don't have the willingness to look and take responsibility for what's ours, it can be a very different outcome. So let's turn this over. So what I want to look at here is, what is unresolved trauma? Okay, so what does it look like? I want to give you some things to start diving in into it, just for you to start developing that self-awareness that you need. So unresolved trauma is fear, guilt, shame, those emotions, any fear, guilt, and shame that you are carrying unconsciously or consciously from your childhood experiences is an element of your trauma. Now, I don't want to get into this argument. So often when it comes to talking about trauma, people talk about how, my trauma is not really trauma because, it wasn't as bad as this person, or, it was mine was way worse than this person. It's not about comparison. This is really important when you're looking at your own experience. It's just what's more important than trying to compare it to other people, because when you compare it, what happens is you invalidate how you're feeling, and that's going to basically shut down any inner work that you're doing. You need to be able to validate how you felt. It doesn't matter if it doesn't match, what people have told you. It doesn't matter anything. It's just how you feel is how you feel, and that's what you have to be very open with and acknowledge. You have to see that any, fear, guilt, or shame that you carry from your childhood experiences around any different things that happen is an element of trauma. And it's not about whether it's, my trauma is better than, greater than yours, or my trauma is lesser than yours. So don't worry about that type of thing. Just focus on you and honor, with a degree of presence and love, what you felt and what is true for you. That's the most important thing. So remember, fear, guilt, and shame, all of those emotions, related to significant, emotionally charged childhood experiences that you had. And remember, they've got to be significant for you. It may not have been significant for your parents. They may not have, been very conscious at all of what they were doing and hardly recognized it, but it was what was significant for you in those experiences that made it somewhat traumatic or caused you to feel emotional pain. So anything that your children do that triggers a strong emotional reaction in you is also a sign that you're carrying trauma from your own childhood. Okay, so what about their behavior, the way they act, their expression of emotions? What about that triggers strong emotional reactions of shame, fear, guilt, maybe anger or defensiveness in you? That's a great thing to look at, to start becoming aware of what trauma is. Okay, trauma is also any extreme fear-based rigid beliefs or behavior that you project onto your children. Okay, so any extreme, rigid, black or white, fear-based beliefs that you project onto your children is an element of trauma that you are carrying with you, an element of your past experience that is still unresolved, and it usually centers around a part of yourself that you weren't allowed to express, in the presence of your parents. Maybe you got punished for, maybe your parents withdrew their love and affection, approval, all those different things. There's so many different levels that this trauma can become subconsciously sabotaging as a result of these early experiences. All right, let's turn this page over. So the first step along this journey is that we need to develop a deeper awareness of your unresolved emotional trauma. So hopefully that first explanation I gave you, there are some of the things you can start looking at to discover what is emotional trauma and how, what does it look like for you, and where can you start looking to find that. That's some of the, great things you can start, the questions you can start asking, some of the great things you can start referring to start unraveling and looking deeper at yourself and where you might still be carrying some of that unresolved emotional pain and trauma from your childhood experiences. So here are some questions to ask to complete this step one. What emotionally significant or traumatic experiences did you have as a child? Okay, so pose that question to yourself. What emotionally traumatic or significant experiences did you have as a child? I mean, these can be positive as well as negative, but when it comes to looking at shame and fear and guilt, there's usually an element of, emotional pain that is around these, so it's more of a traumatic experience. Significant in that way on an emotional level, on maybe a sense of feeling unsafe, or feeling emotionally unsafe or physically unsafe for expressing certain behaviors or being, a certain way around your parents. Okay, so the next one is, as a child, describe your relationship with your parents on an emotional level. So again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to describe your relationship with your parents. What was your relationship like with your mother? What was your relationship like with your father? And sometimes it's important to look at, father and mother can represent masculine and feminine energies, which, there's so many different expressions of that masculine and feminine energy in a relationship dynamic. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a father, that the father is always the masculine expression. It can be the other way around. It can be the mother that has more masculine expression of traits and the father that is more feminine, and it can swap and change in different areas of life or different places. So just look at how you related to your parents. How did you relate to masculine energy and feminine energy? How did that affect your expression of masculine and feminine energy? How did that affect your parents' relationship, or your relationships to your parents? How did that affect your ability to express your emotions in a safe way? And did you feel comfortable expressing them? Did you feel uncomfortable? Those types of things. And just looking at how your relationships with your parents affected you on an emotional level and on a belief system level. Okay, the next one. What did you have to be or do to feel love and get affection or approval from your parents? So what did you have to be or do to feel love or to get affection or approval from your parents? Really powerful question. Okay, and the other question could be, what could you absolutely not be that would cause your parents to withdraw their love, affection, and approval from you? What things could you not display? What could you not express? Because it would lead to criticism, judgment, withdrawal of love and affection. That's a really, really powerful one to look at. So the next question to ask is, was it safe to express emotions and vulnerability around your parents? So going back to your childhood and looking at all of the different situations and experiences you had where you were expressing certain emotions, expressing certain feelings, was it safe to be vulnerable and to be open to express your feelings and to own them? Or was it unsafe? Did you get judged or ridiculed, or did love and affection get withdrawn? Or did your parents get angry and hostile and defensive when you acted or behaved in a certain way, when you expressed certain emotions, or when you expressed your vulnerability? Because oftentimes vulnerability can be a trigger for shame for so many of us. And a lot of times as children, we will innocently express our emotions fully and will own them fully because we don't have any judgments or we're not inhibited about them. And it's when we express them in this very innocent way and very natural and healthy way that sometimes we are wide open for our parents to create an emotionally unsafe environment for us and cause us to feel shame, to feel guilt, and to feel like parts of us are unworthy of love. So was it safe to be vulnerable? Was it safe to express your emotions in your environment with your parents? Okay, the next question is, what emotions or behaviors were safe to express and what were unsafe to express? So what emotions and behaviors were safe to express and what emotions and or behaviors were unsafe, not safe to express? So just really think about in your childhood experiences, what was safe and what was unsafe as far as emotions go, as far as expressing certain vulnerable, open parts of yourself. Next question, what are your deepest emotional wounds that your children trigger in you? So again, looking at what do your children trigger in you? Okay, so when your children are just going about their day, doing their thing in their normal home environment, what behaviors that they express, what emotions that they express trigger you the most, trigger the deepest wounds in you? Okay, a really powerful question to ask, because often when we have certain behaviors that show up in our children that we find very hard to not react to and not get triggered by, usually that means that they have a very important symbolic reference to our own childhood, okay, and some of the experiences and trauma that we're hanging on to from our childhood that is unresolved. Okay, so that's a great way in to look is what behaviors, what emotions, and what aspects of your children that when they express those aspects trigger you the most, trigger the deepest wounds in you. All right, the next question. What behaviors in your children emotionally trigger you? Okay, so again, pretty similar. What behaviors in your children trigger emotional responses in you? Trigger fear, guilt, shame, all of those reactions. Okay, a great way to start looking at and developing more awareness about where you are holding on to emotional pain from your childhood and projecting that onto your children. Again, you have to have the courage and the willingness to take back your projection and look at yourself, in a very authentic and honest way and own what is yours instead of projecting it onto your children.